Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to the Orange Bloods Modcast here on Orange Bloods Live. I'm Jeff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson, Jason Sukumo, and Alex Dunlap. We'll be talking Texas football, the #1 ranked Texas football team. And guys, I want to, and by the way, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. And by all means, if you need some help with the law, Daly and Black, our guys out of Houston, help raise a bunch of money for Texas baseball NIL. They have like a 100 positive popularity rating right now amongst Orange Bloods everywhere. If you're in the Houston area and you need a little help, they can absolutely provide it for you. So reach out to the guys over at Daly and Black, Orange Bloods through and through, putting their money and their time and their effort where their mouth is. Guys, I wanted to start today's show off with I went into this season with an idea of what this football team was. And then my first impression of it was this team's really talented and really good. And 3 weeks into the season, every time I watch them play, I like them more. I think the talent is oozing all over the field. Every time a backup comes in, they sometimes look better than the starter. So I wanted to start with where our minds are with this Texas football team. All four of us, I'm getting ready to release the Orange Bloods SEC Power Poll. Everybody's got Texas in the #1 spot, except for Cody. Still has Georgia there. What takes this team down? Onward, I'll start with you because I went with an 11-1 record when it was all said and done. Feeling pretty good about that pick right now. But the more I watch this team, the better I think it is. And the more my impressions of what it will take to beat this Texas team changes a little bit, it kind of feels like it's going to take one hellacious effort to knock off this version of these Texas Longhorns.
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, there's still Oklahoma. For whatever you think that they are, it's still a rivalry game. And I've covered this game long enough, and I've seen on the other side catch where Oklahoma seemingly had the better team, maybe not as good as this one from a defensive standpoint, and wild things have happened. So, to me, when I went into the season, I still had Texas beating Michigan. So that hasn't wavered for me. That they're doing the thing that I expected them to do, but they still got to come into the meat of their schedule. The only thing that's changed for me is that last week, the other week I thought Kentucky sucked. The past week they were a little bit better. I still think overall they suck though. So the thing is, I probably went 10-2. I'm probably, I still got to see what happens when they get past Oklahoma and Georgia, because one's a rivalry game. Crazy things happen, even though I think they're better than Oklahoma. I just do.
What's the kryptonite for this team? Like what gets them beat?
Just one aspect? Well, I mean,
there is one.
Well, the kryptonite's injuries. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the kryptonite to me is and it's, I don't want to just put that out in the atmosphere, but that to me is the kryptonite of this team, is that if you start getting more substantial injuries, then all of a sudden, I mean, they already had injuries to the running back room. They already got an injury to their quarterback room, right? So if that thing continues to happen, I know next man up, but you can only go so far with some of this next man up stuff. So to me, injuries is kryptonite.
Jason, who would be the injury? Is there one injury? Is this, if Anwar's right, and kryptonite, this team's kryptonite would be just health? Is there a player that cripples the team's depth and changes the season, or would we be talking about even a larger accumulation of bodies that we'd be talking about 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, that the pile up causes the pile up, as opposed to, because I don't know that losing Quinn Ewers for a couple of weeks automatically does it. And quite frankly, I don't know that I'm cool on this team's chances of beating anybody. That includes Georgia if Arch Manning had to play. I think they're a better team with Quinn Ewers, but I don't think they become a lost hope with Arch Manning on the field either.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree. That's the only kryptonite I can think of is injuries. I mean, if this team's healthy and playing up to its standard, I don't think it loses a game. I was at 10-2 before the season. and I'm probably 11-1, maybe 12-0 right now. Like you, Catch, every time I watch this team, I'm more and more impressed. I don't think they've played a good opponent yet, including Michigan. I know Michigan was on the road. I don't think Michigan's that good, but they're doing what you're supposed to do against bad or mediocre opponents. They're beating the crap out of them. So I think this is a really good Texas team. Who is the one injury? You know what? I mean, right now it'd be Arch, right? Although Trey Owens,
the next quarterback.
exactly. So, I don't think they could afford to maybe lose Jaden Blue for a long term. On defense, I don't know. Maybe Ant Hill, maybe Manny Muhammad. I don't know that those guys change the course of the season if they're out for a few weeks, but they'd be tough to replace. But as you said, I think it'd be a cumulative effect of already having lost 2 running backs. You already lost Quinn. What happens if Arch has to? I don't, like Omar said, I'm knocking on wood. I don't want to put that out there, but if Arch had to miss a game or something, what if they missed a couple key players on defense? I still think this is a team, even with all those injuries, that would be really good. It could still beat the Oklahomas, maybe the Georgias of the world. But, at some point, like Omar said, next man up can only go so far before you're going to start seeing some impact for those injuries. So that, to me, is the only thing that can really slow this team down the way they're looking through 3 weeks.
Alex, you end up watching as much of this team as anybody just because of what your job demands in terms of reviewing every play and reviewing every player and who's on the field at all times. So I want to just kind of come to you with the same question. You may have a different perspective than us on this. Let's take injuries out of the equation, because I think Anwar makes a really good point, and it's probably the point. But if there was a second piece of kryptonite for this team that's more football related than, things it can't control related, do you have anything in mind?
I mean, no. Well, you said not the injury stuff. I think that an injury to either of the offensive tackles would be substantial. But yeah, man, I think that I do. The truth of the matter, Catch, is we haven't seen any indication of what that kryptonite could possibly be yet. Texas has been fairly dominant in all these games and in most aspects of the game. I started to think, well, what was it exactly that slowed them down maybe a tiny bit in the second half of the Michigan game offensively? And I can't think back and really pinpoint anything. That there were some penalties.
They slowed themselves down on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of Sark kind of said later that he was a little bit frustrated looking back at what they decided to do there in the second half of that game. I mean, I hate to, it's just like, it sounds like I'm parroting Sark and just but just the self-inflicted stuff. I would say I don't think there's anything that one team has identified yet with Texas in any aspect, in offensively or defensively. Special teams, I don't know if there's some kind of clink in the armor there, like that's something that I don't really know about, right? But offensively, defensively, there's been nothing that's been demonstrated to me that says like, oh gosh, man, they start getting into a one high shell and make them do there's been nothing like that, right? Nothing that says like, oh man, every time this happens, it gives them trouble. So I think it's still yet to be seen. It's not a good answer. But it's like, I think it kind of goes to show how Texas has played this year. It's like you guys have said, we're talking about them now like a team that could run the table.
It's interesting. I've got a couple directions I want to go in. Let's just stop for a second. Anwar, this team is ranked number 1 in the country. I feel like there's so much stuff going on. I feel like that should be the only thing that we're talking about. And maybe in a world where Quinn Ewers is healthy and Arch isn't playing and we get bored with Heisman discussion or whatever, maybe we'd be going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over this number 1 ranking. But it's a really big accomplishment. And you don't want it to be like when the basketball team became number 1 like a decade and a half ago and then, never recovered from it. So you have to learn to deal with the pressure that comes with being the team. But what an accomplishment for Steve Sarkisian, less than 3 full seasons after 5-7, to be in a position where people people all over the country said, you know what? Yeah, Texas deserves more benefit of the doubt than Georgia. I feel like in a way we've just kind of skipped right over this pretty incredible thing that's happened.
Well, what's fascinating about it, Catch, is that not only is there number one, but we saw, and I know while it was the playoff committee, but we saw last year when you lose a starting quarterback like FSU did, like the playoff committee dinged them. They're like, you ain't good without them. So they literally lost a playoff spot as an undefeated team because of the QB getting hurt. And this happens here with Texas. And they're like, yeah, well, you got Arch, so you're good. You're still the number one team in the country. Like, so factor that into the mindset of voters is that Texas didn't even get dinged for a starting QB being out. It was kind of overlooked because of the totality of what they've been able to do, which is go out and to Jason's point, you make the subpar opponents look bad. Like, you still got to go out and do that. You still got to make Colorado State look like Colorado State. You still got to go out and make UTSA look like UTSA. Then you go on the road, and then you beat Michigan the way that it does. Yeah, I mean, it is impressive. It's interesting when Sark talked about it yesterday about still kind of like he always envisioned that this is where it would be. So he doesn't necessarily feel the need to say anything different to the team, and he's got to kind of stay the course. And it's crazy to think that when his team was 5-7, are you talking about just a few years ago, wasn't that long ago, that Sark was still saying, like, eventually we're going to get there, right? And I can get it, right? Because he kept thinking, well, these aren't my quarterbacks. These aren't the players that I recruited. This is not what I want, and this is not what I think is going to be able to succeed. And then to be able to kind of implement that, where we've heard all these coaches over the past couple of years say, this is what I'm going to do. This is what's going to make Texas successful. To actually be able to do that and make Texas successful, I mean, it says a lot about Sark, the player buy from the players and the coaching staff.
Alex, I was thinking about your first column while Anwar was talking. And at the same time, we're finally seeing the Texas offensive line have multiple linemen score in the 80s. And I know for people who aren't on Orange Bloods and are watching this video right now, they may not completely have any idea the context of what that means, but you've been writing the deep digs over at Orange Bloods for more than a decade, and I don't remember any offensive lineman ever really scoring anything outside of the 70s. So it got to be kind of a running joke where it was like, Alex, can you just show us what does it look like when a guy actually scores above an 80 in the rankings? Now we've seen multiple games where there have been multiple guys in the 80s, and you would have even had that again, an extra layer of that in the Michigan game if Cam Williams doesn't have the pre-snap penalties that he does. So you have an offensive line that's performing really well. You've got skill guys who are incredibly dangerous when they touch the ball. Then you look over on the defensive side of the ball, and we're looking at a team that's got a number of players who are producing at rates that we've not seen before. There's clusters of players from this team that are having, if they could extrapolate this over 12 games, it'd be the highest rated seasons that you've done in over 10 years. And so this is what it looks like when there's a number one team, both sides of the ball, doing things that, quite frankly, we've never seen before since you've been here doing the breakdowns of the teams and the gradings of the positions. It is, if we ever wondered out loud, well, what does that look like? Now we know.
Yeah, and I started it in 2013. So it's like, it has been, it's like, that's 12 years, 12 seasons now. It's like, and it's nothing like any others. There have been some guys who had scored up, gotten up into the 80s. Kelvin did it a couple times last year, of course, but Connor Williams, he sometimes got like an 81, popped up to like an 81 or 82, and Sam Cosme did as well. But nothing like this. Like you said, they would have had three versus Michigan, and just from the start of the UTSA game, I never know how the grades are going to come out, but from the start of it, like they start out really well in the UTSA game too. I'm still not done with that, but Yeah, man. I mean, what we're seeing with Colin Simmons, it's like you said, if they can extrapolate this out through the course of a season, I mean, I think it would break my brain if they were able to if they were able to do that. It might break the system. It could break the system. But some of these guys that have the really high efficiency, as far as their production on a per snap basis, I think we'll see. I know we'll see Ethan Burke sort of fall a little bit over the course of these next couple of weeks, simply because his productivity is buttressed by just one monster play on just 58 total snaps, right? But if you look at it, Anthony Hill, what he's doing, it feels like Ant Hill to me has almost kind of left some meat on the bone. He should have had a sack in that game. I think
they didn't credit him with the sack, but he had a sack.
Yeah, well, I mean, the quarterback gave himself up, and so he wasn't really, it wasn't anything where he. I think the rule says it. I think the rule says that that's not a sack.
Did they classify that as a
right there?
What?
Did they classify that? Like, I thought someone said like he was trying to run. Like,
it was a pass play. The quarterback then scrambles outside the pocket, and as Anthony Hill starts to close in on him, he gives himself up.
Yeah. But I think on the official play-by-play, they tried to classify that as a quarterback run. Which whatever. I mean, I agree with you. It looked like a sack to me. But
yeah, all sacks count against the rushing yardage. So whether he tried to run or not run,
maybe you're right. Maybe
it will count as run yardage.
Regardless, but so on that play, I ended up giving him a pressure, right? And so if it would have been a sack, that all I'm saying is it feels like Ant Hill, he's been really good in every game. He's been super active. If you watch the game closely, you understand what an effect he has on the game. But we still Anthony Hill's gonna have some of these games that are the total eye-popping, ridiculous flash play kind of games, like the kinds of games that Colin Simmons has had the last 2 weeks, right? Ant Hill's going to have those kinds of games, and he's already way up. He's producing at a level of efficiency that's higher than anybody else besides Colin Simmons. That's producing once every 3.24 snaps, which is just absurd. The best season ever was Hassan Ridgeway, I think, at 2015. He was at like once every 5 point. I don't know. I don't have it pulled up, but once every like 5.35 snaps, something like that. Followed closely by last year's dudes that were just so good, and Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy and Ant Hill from last year and stuff. And these guys are at a level kind of above that. Jahdae Barron right now is playing at a level is at the same as like what Ant Hill played at last year. Jalen Gilbo is like top 15. And when I say top 15, like I said, I've been doing this for 12 years. This is out of like 170 guys that have played at least 200 snaps at Texas. So, yeah, man, like when you talk about the offensive line, people say, God, Alex, why is it every week I tune into this column and every week these guys rate out at somewhere between 74 and 77. It's like, what's the point of this? What does it even look like when they do good? I was like, well, you got an offensive line that's going to win the Joe Moore Award. This is what it looks like. They're scoring in the 80s and stuff. And you have the number one team in the country, and they've virtually shut out everybody that they've played. And the defense looks that good. And this is what you have when the per snap efficiency is that good amongst like half of the starters. It is what it is, man. Like it's the number one team in the country, and they're playing like it, and the numbers show that.
Jason, I compiled the Texas SEC schedule with the Georgia SEC schedule just because they're going to play each other. They're 1 and 2 in the polls. We've talked about maybe they'll play 3 times this season. Who knows what will happen? So as things currently stand, this blows my mind. I just finished the Orange Bloods SEC Power Poll. As things stand today, Texas plays the number 2 team in the Power Poll, Georgia, the number 7 team in the Power Poll, Oklahoma, A&M's at 9, Arkansas's 11th, Kentucky's 12th, Florida's 13th, Vanderbilt's 15th, Mississippi State is 16th. They basically play, other than Auburn, they play everybody 11 and lower. Georgia plays number 1 Texas, number 3 Bama, number 4 Ole Miss, and number 5 Tennessee before adding Kentucky at 12, who they just played, and then Florida, Auburn, and Mississippi State. This thing really is set. There really are. Georgia's the only comparable team that Texas plays. Then they play a pretty good Oklahoma, a pretty okay Texas A&M, and then dogs. And I'm just at a point now where it's like, if they don't make it to the SEC championship game, it's going to be a real shock to me. If you tell me that today, I'm just going to assume that what Anwar said about injuries overwhelming the team ends up being something that takes place, because it's not going to be the schedule.
Yeah, and those other teams are going to knock each other out. You know, the Tennessees, the Missouris, who am I leaving out? Georgia, obviously. Oh, Alabama, of course. I mean, there's like
Texas, Bama, Ole Miss, Tennessee.
Ole Miss,
and you probably put Missouri in that category. There's like 6.
I mean, even if Texas loses to Georgia, which I don't think they will, the way that, based on, I know when 1 week is 1 week, but based on what I saw last week, I like Texas in that game. But even if Texas loses to Georgia, the rest of that schedule is super manageable, right? It's hard to find a second loss. Whereas these other teams, man, they're going to be, it's going to be a bloodbath for some of those teams each week, whereas they might suffer a couple losses in conference. So you're right. I mean, anything less than I haven't thought of it that way, Catch, but anything less than a conference championship game appearance, based on the way this schedule is setting up, I think it'd be a pretty big letdown for Texas. I mean, I don't think Oklahoma's in Texas's category. I don't think Texas A&M's in Texas's category, although maybe A&M found something with that young quarterback. I don't know. But, I mean, other than Georgia, it looks like Georgia and Texas on one level and then another level, about 4 teams, and another level with Oklahoma and A&M. Well, Texas only plays Georgia, and then they play that third level. They don't play anybody in that kind of second level, the Tennessees, the Ole Misses, Alabama. So it sure sets up pretty well for Texas, I think, to make a run towards that Big 12, the SEC championship game. And if they're not there, the way things stand right now, yeah, I think that'd be a pretty big disappointment.
Catch, dare I say, don't you guys overlook that Arkansas game, Catch.
No one's overlooking it, but they are 11th in the SEC.
Catch, I'm not doing that. I refuse to do that. I ain't playing that game again. I played that game a couple of years ago and lost.
I tell you what, though, Anwar, I'm looking at your power poll. Let me just count this out real quick before I say. So you've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The highest ranked team outside of Georgia left from the SEC for you is Oklahoma, who you have at 9th in the SEC.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt 10th, Arkansas 11th, A&M 12th, Kentucky 13th, Florida 15th, Mississippi State 16th.
Yeah.
I mean,
they should dog walk all those teams, man.
Do you know how mad I would be if I was Oklahoma or A&M? And A&M's got a pretty manageable schedule this year, but Oklahoma, you can almost flip it upside down. They play almost the opposite of all of the teams that Texas plays. And it starts this week with Tennessee at home. And it's like, that's exactly the kind of game that Texas does not have to deal with this year. That Jason's right. There's a gap between Georgia at 2 and then OU at 7. Actually, apologies. OU's 8th. LSU will finish with 1. So I actually have that wrong. They'll play only one team in the SEC between 1 and 8 based on the way things stand today. And, you know, I can't – you could not have told me, Anwar, that a month ago before the season started, that in less than 3 weeks or in 3 weeks, I would be in a position where I think I'm watching maybe the second best Texas team I've ever seen. That other than 2005, which was just a different thing, that this might be the second best Texas team I've ever covered. The schedule's even weaker than we thought it was. We do shows every day during the summer. You're looking for content. Believe me, we talked about the state of that schedule and how weak it looked on paper. It's even weaker on paper 3 weeks in. Texas is number 1 in the country. This is quite the bizarro world that we've walked into.
The thing is, Catch, you know what? It echoes a little bit of what we've said before, which is for years the SEC has been really top heavy, and they've been able to ride the coattails of Georgia and Alabama for their success. But when you look at a lot of those other teams in that league, in that conference, like, they're just okay. They're just okay. And now they've got some good teams, sure, but outside, we're only thinking at this moment Texas and Georgia as real like national championship contenders. We look at Alabama as a playoff team. We'll have to see what Tennessee does when they actually face some real competition, even though they're beating the crap out of everybody they're facing. And yeah, we're at this point now, Catch, where we're looking at Texas and they're handling their business. These other teams don't look good. I mean, the Floridas. We thought that coach might get fired over the weekend. It didn't happen. I don't know what happened with that meeting that was supposed to occur. We look at Kentucky. They're not good, and so much for having a 5-star quarterback and what that's supposed to mean for that program. And you said all these other programs aren't that good, and so it's shaping up perfectly. But here's the thing, though. Even though it's shaping up perfectly, the schedule, it doesn't negate. It only adds to that Texas is so damn good that we expect them to potentially run the table. It's not like it's shaping up and we think Texas is going to win by 1 point or 3 points in every the rest of these SEC games. We're looking at it like they're so much better than the competition that these guys don't have a chance because of what's been built.
And I think one thing too, it's like people in the chat are saying the schedule makers did them a big favor, and you all said that too. And like Ketch said, and I mean, Anwar, you and I know very well. In the summer, it's like you pull up that schedule, you talk about it, you do everything you can. You just try. Sometimes you're trying to get, you're trying to squeeze blood out of a rock as far as content during the summer, right? So I mean, we talked over the schedule, but we always said Texas seems like it's set up pretty well, right? And like Georgia looks like they're gonna have a tougher schedule this year than they did last season, and everything. But what I'm saying, we still had to see how the run out was going to be, right? It's like things have turned out to where it looks like, yeah, people who were saying that Texas has a much better schedule, this is unfair that they gave them this easiest schedule coming in. Well, I mean, it's kind of looking like it, but dude, I think
Alex, where Texas only plays one team in the top 8, OU plays every team in the top 8 except for Georgia and themselves.
No, I'm looking real quick. Georgia plays at Alabama. That's next week. They got at Texas, at Ole Miss, Tennessee. Who's got a kind of a favorable schedule is Ole Miss. If you want to,
I was just looking at Ole Miss's schedule.
They got at LSU. Okay,
they don't have to play Tennessee.
No, they got Oklahoma at home, and then they play at Georgia. That's it. I mean, they've got a pretty favorable.
At Tennessee.
No, they do not play Tennessee.
Georgia at Oklahoma. Is that what you said?
Georgia at LSU at LSU, and then Oklahoma at home. Right. At Arkansas.
I mean, look, man, if they beat Georgia at Georgia, they beat LSU in the swamp, then not the swamp, but at Death Valley, then they
probably run the table. Yeah. Tennessee's got a tough schedule. They've got Oklahoma this week, but they play Alabama. They've got Georgia. Alabama's got Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma. I'm only kind of rattling off like the kind of top tier teams. Missouri's got a pretty light
Texas
schedule.
plays 5 of the worst Texas plays 5 of the 6 worst teams in the SEC. Oklahoma gets 1 of those teams.
Well, going into the season, Texas, I think the last 4 teams that they were playing on the schedule had the worst odds of winning the SEC title. So, I mean, we knew kind of what that was going to look like. I don't think we thought that Kentucky would be as bad as they are, but so that kind of adds to it.
We got a super chat here from Buck Wild Longhorn. He says thank you, Buck Wild Longhorn. If you guys want a super chat, we'll always throw it right up. How many draft picks are currently on the roster? Cody and I went through this exercise on our show Football with Friends. It's on weeknights at 6 p.m. here on the channel. And I think we came up with just looking at the whole roster and just projecting even guys that are, freshmen and stuff. I think we came up with like 34.
I was going to say between 35 and 40.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go through and count them, but I'm not sure. I think that would take a long time. I think it ended up taking us about 5 minutes that day. So,
Buck Wild, ask that again. late February.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Believe me, you'll get your money's worth on that day. No, I think look, Sark has kind of indicated they want to kind of hit double digits every year. There's going to be a lot of transfers, though. Maybe my number's too high, and I'm thinking 35 to 40 because I'm thinking the next 4 years of portal additions because, I mean, the math says half of this roster will eventually be gone before it ever gets to the NFL. That, and Texas will start eventually to lose some people in the portal that they really would like to keep, all things being equal, that they're going to have somebody. I bet it happens at the wide receiver position at some point, that there's just so much talent coming in that, somebody's like, I got to go someplace else and get mine, and not necessarily, especially if they win a national championship, because that's the thing that we saw with it, like Georgia, where suddenly the Bear Alexanders or the Adonai Mitchells of the world are like, I got a championship ring. Maybe I should go live in a penthouse or make more money than I would otherwise make. Penthouse is where Bear Alexander lives. So your number's probably better than mine, Alex. 34-ish, 30 to 34.
So Catch, one of the things to the Kryptonite thing, that I think Texas has to be careful of is when we know the Georgia game, right? We'll throw that in there. But I will have to say that there are 3 rivalry games that in 2 of the 3 are, outside of Texas. So what, Dallas is a neutral site, right? But Arkansas is on the road. A&M is on the road as well. So there's 3 games that are away from DKR. And again, I get Dallas as a neutral site. But if you start talking about like Kryptonite things, again, just ask Georgia. I mean, Georgia was supposed to go in and beat the dog walk Kentucky based off what we saw. And all of a sudden, they were in a life or death game in the fourth quarter that needed to kind of pull that one out. And so that, if there is anything, it is when you face the rivalry game. And again, we joke about the Arkansas thing, right? Because I said,
I don't joke. It's real.
It is real. Like Sark wants to say, it's cool that Sark wants to say, hey, I like going on the road. First of all, when he says it's 100,000 people and only 100 of us. Okay, Sark, I've seen Texas fans travel. Like you're taking that one too far. There's never a game where there's only been 100 Texas fans that have traveled to a road game. I've yet to see that. Okay, so. But going into these hostile environments where Arkansas will be a very, very hostile environment, won't be a night game, so it'll be a little bit of a difference. And A&M will be a very hostile environment. I just think the rivalry games, they just got to make sure they don't trip up in any of those rivalry games.
Games that haven't taken place yet, so they all loom in front of them. So it's injuries and those pesky rivalry non-home games, of which, as Onwar points out, there are 3 this year. But when that happened, when that schedule first came out, it was like, oh, man, at A&M, at Arkansas. Maybe by the end of the year, I still look at that A&M game, Onwar, as dangerous as I did before the season. A&M may not be built the way that I thought they would be built, and their success and strength. I mean, look, Connor Weigman might be out, which is wild. Because I feel like the entire offseason we listened to Aggie fans try to convince us that Weigman was on the level of
Quinn. He was on Dave Campbell's cover. He literally was on Dave Campbell's cover.
And he might not make it out of September, which is wild to me. But I still look at that A&M game. It's at the end of the season. To me, boy, what a moment that will be for both sides of the rivalry if that much is on the line. And maybe it won't feel as much because if you're 11-0 at that point, you're going to make the playoff. You're in. You can lose that game and you're still probably in the SEC championship game. But it's a chance to mark the season, knock Texas out of number 1. And oh, by the way, I can't wait to see how Texas deals with carrying that badge of honor around. There's a big difference between being number 1 and number 2.
I was waiting.
I was talking, so I thought someone else may want to jump in. So that I was trying to.
On one was being nice, fellas.
I was trying to share.
Sharing is caring.
I think the difference between Sark said, I mean, it's like Sark said yesterday at his press conference, you know, it's like the messaging's always been the same. You know, the media, of course, I listened to the player interviews that On Warren Sonny, you know, got yesterday and stuff. And of course, the media is just having to pester these guys about it. So, you know, they're saying they're Bianco approved stuff, saying like, you know, I haven't really thought much about it. Doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter if we're number 3. You know, they're like, but it has to be pretty cool, right? Like the media is just badgering these guys.
By badger, you mean they ask them questions?
Yeah, they badger them.
It's called an interview session, Alex.
Yeah,
they literally have to ask questions. Otherwise, they sit there and don't speak like we did for about 10 seconds just then. It's awkward.
They could think of some better questions, a lot of these guys.
Well, now that I agree with.
But like, I think they're being truthful when they're saying it's. Look, if we're to believe all the stuff that Sark says, and I think I do believe him with how important everything is with him, with his culture, his messaging, all this stuff, regardless of what you think about him, or if you're a fan of the Texas program, or I mean, at least to a man, it feels like that's something that's at least very important to him, right? Whether you think it works, whether you think it's right, you know, whatever, it's something that's important to him, right? He thinks an awful lot about this stuff. I don't know of any coach that I've covered here at Texas, but any coach that I've just sort of kind of known about their style and stuff that cares so much about the sports psychology stuff as him. He thinks about his messaging, and when he's saying that he's been consistent with it the whole time, so where it's like when you get to this level, because that was always the expectation, you don't have to change course and just try to navigate something new. You know, if they. I worry less about this team handling something like that simply because I know for a fact it's something that's so important to Sark, and knowing it's so important to Sark, I think that he's painstakingly tried to sort of implement this and planning for this eventuality.
I think Sark brought up a good point there, because the polls are maybe less no disrespect to the polls, but they're less meaningful than they used to be. That's how they used to determine who played for them.
Yeah, that's a good point too, man. Right?
Now you're trying to get in the college football playoff, but catch what you said, that A&M game, if Texas goes in, they're undefeated. That game's going to be huge for Texas, because they're going to want to solidify a top 4 spot so they get a first round bye. So that game still has a ton of importance.
The only thing that would matter is the week after.
Well,
you have to win the SEC to get a top 4 spot in the poll. Record be damned.
Okay, I guess you're right. If you already were in the SEC championship going into that game, then maybe not. But
you could argue you could rest your players in the A&M game.
I mean, yeah, depending on what happens with the teams around you. Yeah. So, yeah.
But you don't want to be in a situation where you lose A&M, and then God forbid you lose SEC championship game. Now you're at 2 losses, and now you're like in that scramble mode of like hoping and praying that you get in.
Well, you're in, but you're probably on the road for every game.
Yeah. Are you 2 back-to-back losses?
I think 2 losses you're in. I think
probably, but
you're in, but you're somewhere between probably 8 and 12.
I think you're in, but listen, 2 losses. It matters when you lose. If you lose 2 consecutive games to end your regular season, you're probably in.
They're still in. They'd still be in. There's no way they're punishing a team. They're not going to, because the thing that won't happen is, I don't think a team that loses the SEC championship game falls all the way out. Otherwise, what a can of worms that'll open up with, you know, then you'll start having people say, should we even play conference championship games? Because it cost a team a chance to be in the playoffs. Sorry, I got the hiccups all of a sudden. Super chat, a couple of super chats I wanted to get to. Chris asks, and Jason, I'll come to you on this. OU loses big, Fasusi on flip watch at any point.
I think if they lose big repeatedly, possibly, but he seems pretty happy with his commitment. He was up in Norman, I think, last weekend. You know, Chris, I do need to check with Mike just to say, hey, man, are the lines of communication even open with Texas? You know, Texas has 5. I don't know how aggressively they're going to push there. Seems like his mind was pretty well made up long before he announced. I wouldn't say he's on flip watch, but it would certainly be something I would at least be monitoring. I wouldn't be predicting a flip by any means, but it'd be a story I'd at least be keeping an eye on.
They need to offer that preferred walk-on best friend of his a scholarship and
Someone told me they kind of quietly did. It was never broadcast or never put out there if they did. But yeah, that would be a good strategy if you want to flip Fasusi. That's probably going to have to be part of the equation.
Jason, I have a theory that it only happens if Fasusi initiates the contact.
Well, that's just kind of where I'm at. And again, I've kind of let that one lie for a few weeks. I need to circle back and check on it. But I don't think Texas is right now is aggressively trying to pursue him for a flip. If Fasusi starts having second thoughts and maybe he sends a DM or calls somebody at Texas, well, yeah, then that thing's going to heat up in a hurry. But I tend to agree with you. I don't think Texas right now is aggressively pushing for a flip from Michael Fasusi.
They probably would want an NIL discount as well. We got a $5 super chat from Chris. I can already hear the SEC fans blaming UT having a weak schedule if they run the table the first year in this so-called great conference. Hook 'em, SEC overrated. Chris, they play Georgia. So at the end of the day, no matter what happens, to go undefeated means they have to beat Georgia. And I think they'll get credit for that should it happen.
Do you think the rest of this schedule is easier than a typical Big 12 schedule?
It's on par.
Yeah. Huh.
I mean, because, think about it like this. If you were playing –
I don't know if it's – dude, you got Oklahoma you'd be playing regardless.
Yeah. Right, but I think Oklahoma State's better than OU right now.
Well, you'd be playing Oklahoma State and Oklahoma.
So I think that's a Missouri. You're playing a couple of more middle class, the Kansas States of the world. If you played a Utah, I think you're getting more – because keep in mind, Texas plays 2, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16. So, the bottom of the teams is the bottom of the teams. It's comparable, I think. Because if you take – there's nobody that meets Georgia, but you're already going to play Oklahoma. So the question is, would there be anybody left on your schedule as good as A&M and Arkansas? Yes. Probably 4 or 5 teams that are at that level.
What I don't think you get in the SEC is you don't get those games where you just kind of sleepwalking, still get a win. But I think in terms of you play Oklahoma regardless, there's no team comparable to Georgia, but you'd play Oklahoma State probably. They're better than Texas A&M. K-State's probably better than Texas A&M right now, right?
Let me say this again. Oklahoma is in 8th in our SEC power poll. They play 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So for Oklahoma, the answer is no.
Yeah, but you know what Oklahoma's problem is, though, Catch? There's 2 things. Oklahoma, it was just like before the season when the coach started saying, we need to start building for the SEC. And we realized that, they got some pretty good linemen in the trenches. And I'm like, where the hell you been? Did you not get the memo with everybody else that you were going to join the SEC? It's now you just come into this realization that you need to build for the conference that you're in. At the end of the day, I feel like the way Sark built it, if the schedule was flipped and that was the Texas schedule, we would still be saying Texas probably has the edge in the majority of those games. The reason why Oklahoma doesn't have the edge is because they didn't build for it. They're just acting like it's brand new information. So that's more an OU than it is anything else, that they're not prepared for this upcoming season. And the last thing I'll say for Chris, too, the one thing about the SEC, and I think Alex would agree to this because he was there in Arlington, if Texas runs the table and they win a natty, unlike the Big 12, which is kind of like a crab in the bucket kind of conference, they'll have more pride that they won and they have all these teams and they will beat their chest we are the SEC more so than we'll screw Texas. That's what you would get out of the Big 12. It's Texas Tech, all these other programs screw Texas. We're not happy with their success. Oklahoma State. In the SEC, your success is our success. Mm-hmm. And I think at the end of the day, more fans would be happy that this whole thing is in the SEC than it's not.
You mean there's not a bunch of little you-know-what syndrome in the SEC, Omar, like there is in the Big 12?
I love the SEC, man. I think it's one of the things, I left that conference or whatever, that media days thing, just thinking this group of people just operates different, man. They really do. And everything Omar just said is totally spot on.
Well, it's a hell of a thing to go out with your friends at night and be like, okay, the only thing that matters is what happens to me. Or you can go out and you're like, my boy Anwar, every time we go out, he walks out with the prettiest girl. And you know what? That's a little bit like me also getting to walk out with the prettiest girl, because I know Anwar, we rode together. So in a way, it's like we both scored. It's a hell of
not really, but
mindset though. It's like, well, hey, Anwar, walked out with a perfect 10. In a way, we all walked out with perfect 10s. Whereas in the old conference, if you walked out with a perfect 10, everybody's there to spite you. Fuck Anwar. I'm tired of going out with him. If we didn't bring Anwar, one of us could walk out with a 10. It's always something. And in the SEC, it very much is everybody's on the same team, and we cheer on everybody's success.
Think of how long how many years has A&M been riding the SEC's jock for their success, right? It's like an SEC team wins a championship. They're like, look at what the SEC has done. We won a championship. And everyone's like, well, you didn't win one. And then it's like, look at all the NFL players that the SEC puts in there. So I think at the end of the day, there may be a couple of people that hate here and there, but overall, everyone's going to chant SEC.
Yeah,
A&M's always going to hate. But
the Kentuckys of the world will adopt Texas very quickly as one of their own. They'll start running those Ricky Williams great SEC moments in history videos.
Well, really, nobody run to Walter Cronkite.
You show VY on fourth.
Bryson says for $4.99, OU might need Fasusi to play on Saturday night. That O-line gives flashback to Charlie Strong days. Bryson, that might be the number one reason why. I think Fasusi knows he can be a day one starter at Oklahoma, Jason. And at Texas, it's just not as cut and dry.
Yeah, that was a contributing factor, I think, for sure.
But yes, Bryson, you're not wrong. Fasusi very well could be needed. All right, guys, let's wrap things up. Real quick, last thing on the show, Jason, we'll turn it to you. A couple of weeks ago, I was kind of poo-pooing Texas could catch Ohio State for the number one ranking in recruiting. But I see Lance Jackson get the 5-star from On3 yesterday, and I think his ranking by all the services will go up. Bo Barnes, I think, is probably going to be close to that kind of territory. They're starting to pick up some 5-stars in recruiting. It doesn't seem impossible today if a number of things got to bounce Texas's way. And I think it really does have to include some guys that aren't 5-stars or close to 5-stars eventually getting up to that level and giving Texas a boost in recruiting points by all of the services. If you had to handicap it, how difficult will it be for Texas to climb all the way to number one?
Very difficult. Chad and I talked about this on our recruiting hour, and I actually still have my notes in front of me. I think for that to happen, Texas would almost have to flip like a Riley Pettijohn, because that hits Ohio State and obviously is a big boost for Texas.
Well, let's give them Hilson. Let's say they get Hilson. So there's one.
Look, Texas has 5 players in the top 100 right now. And so we'll come back to Hilson. Ohio State, has 11. Ohio State has 5 players in the top 25.
They've got 5 stars.
Yeah, so Texas has 5 in the top 100. Ohio State has 5 of the top 25. They got I believe it's the number 1 player in the country committed, and a few in the top 10. So if they get Hilson, if a couple of these guys get recruiting bumps like you suggested, maybe 5-star status or close to it, I still think listen, right now Texas is 5th, and Texas is 18 points ahead of Georgia. Georgia's 6th. Texas is roughly 50 points behind Auburn. So I'm saying 18. Those are closely bunched. Ohio State has a 500-point lead over the number 2 team in the country. Okay, so it's not a small gap. So honestly, the only way I think Texas can catch Ohio State, unless some of their players take dramatic drops in the rankings,
or they have some decommits.
or Texas, and it had to be like flipping like Riley Pettijohn. You're going to have to hit Ohio State where Texas also gets a big gain. So something like that. But I mean, not out of the question, not out of the realm of possibility, but I think it's going to be really tough to get to number 1. Yeah. Number two
though, is doable.
Sure. Number 2 absolutely is doable. In fact, there's a part of me that expects number 2.
Which would be the highest recruited class that Sark would have produced. Still ironic, given the discussions from 6 weeks ago and the fretting that occurred and the bumping of threads. God forbid you say that Texas is very, very confident, and then it turns into a thing. And now nobody's bumped that thread in a while, and it's
you need to go bump that thread.
I need to bump it. Like, every time they get a commitment, I'm going to bump it, and every time they climb up the rankings, I'm going to bump it.
We're moderators. Pin that damn thing.
Make that the only pin thread.
Yes.
Look, guys, we got to go. We got an 11 o'clock meeting, staff meeting for Orange Bloods. Like, comment, subscribe to the page, get notifications. We got shows all day long. If you missed the old fashioned, you can go back and watch that during the break. House Divided in a couple of hours, actually in 8 hour. So watch old fashioned, then watch House Divided. And then know that you've got Football with Friends coming up in the evening. There's nonstop content here on Orange Bloods Live. Give us a thumbs up, like the video. It does help the algorithms and all of those things. And until like an hour from now, we will see you guys.